Hey guys, tonight we're diving into something more mischievous than your last family gathering. The Victorian obsession with Krampus. You know, the horned beast who swapped naughty or nice for a climb aboard my sack or suffer eternal shame. So strap on your most whimsical nightmare, because we aim to uncover why Victorian parents loved scaring kids with this fearsome figure. But before we start, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. Only if you actually enjoy this quirky historical ride. Leave a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Remember, it's always close to bedtime somewhere in the world. Now, dim those lights, maybe switch on a fan for that comforting hum, and wiggle into your favourite sleeping position. Let's get the gears turning. Ever wondered whether naughty children really believed in the Krampus? Did parents ever consider that hiding under the bed wouldn't keep them safe? Did Victorian siblings hold secret competitions to see who could scare each other the most? And how did they manage to convince kids that presents came with a side of fear? Well, congratulations. You've just woken up in Victorian-era Europe, surrounded by cobblestone streets, flickering gaslight, and a neighbourhood watch of Krampus enthusiasts. Welcome to the whimsical horror show. Welcome to the twisted origins of Krampus, the creature who made it onto the naughty list long before bad boys were invented. This half-goat, half-demon figure waded through the folklore of Europe like a cheesy horror flick that accidentally became a cult classic. You can almost hear the medieval villagers whispering about this horned hellion over their locally sourced pottage. But what exactly is the story behind this menacing beast? That's the pressing question on every holiday adventurer's mind. Krampus first lumbered onto the scene in the Alpine folklore of Austria and surrounding regions. But he's more than just a sweet nightmare lurking in the corner. Originating from pre-Christian Alpine traditions, Krampus was likely a spontaneous misinterpretation of pagan gods. His horns towering like those of an angry goat, fangs bared in a perpetual grin, the early images of Krampus felt like something born out of a particularly fantastical nightmare, and the villagers loved it. Imagine rural life in the 17th century, when a child could practically feel the weight of the world on their tiny shoulders as the families waited for St. Nicholas to reward their good behaviour. If one naughty child happened to drop a spoon, blurt out a curse word, or let a chocolate cake devour itself, Krampus was there, the dark undertone to the bright festivities. He was basically the medieval equivalent of that one uncle at the family reunion who tells the story about how he nearly died in a potato sack race at a county fair. But this fearsome figure didn't just embody punishment. He allegedly carried children away in his knapsack. Yes, that's right, a giant wool sack. Imagine Krampus toting around a bunch of your misguided schoolmates like a detour to a bad carnival ride. Step right up. Let's see who ends up in the root cellar of doom. Honestly, as horrifying as that sounds, just picture the collective gasp from the little ones when they found out that Krampus was real and their parents had secretly invited him for the holidays. You've heard of the naughty list, but what about the Krampus list? The idea of earning a spot on that list sent chills down every child's spine like they were sitting in a snowbank during a cold winter's night. Parents used tales of Krampus as an endangered species of deterrent, threatening their little angels with a fate that made their eyes bulge and candied apples crumble. If you don't clean your room, Krampus will find you. Who needs positive reinforcement when you have an angry demon with a penchant for punishing mischief? Now, let's dive deeper into what Krampus really represented. A projection of societal fears. The creature emerged during a period of strict morality, emphasizing the need to behave lest someone or something much worse than a stern father figure swoop in to take charge. Picture a dark night in a German village where the moonlight flickers against the well-worn cobblestones and Krampus begins his ominous stomping down the streets. His heavy steps echo like the rhythm of a heartbeat. The whole village would shudder as children cowered behind their mothers' skirts. Of course, some enterprising folks realised that Krampus's reputation could be profited from. A little seasonal touch of horror at the festivals every December. A chance to make a buck as parents tuck their kids in a little tighter at night. Think of it as an enterprising medieval version of Halloween where children trotted on cobblestones, collecting sweet rewards while avoiding the fanged giant lurking around the corner. Nothing screams Christmas cheer quite like watching a rugged man dressed as Krampus scaring the youth into submission as the tree lights twinkle ominously in the background. As we continue our exploration through the cryptic history of Krampus, remember, this character isn't just a ghastly figure of the past. He serves as a vibrant illustration of how formative folklore can entwine with the spirit of festivities. So as we revisit the delightfully dark tales that constructed this vicious figure, let's pour ourselves a cup of mulled wine and ask ourselves, how did we go from this dreadful celebration to the delightfully sanitized version of Christmas we know now? Keep your eyes peeled. That wild horned creature might just be looking for the next naughty child to grace his list. Ah, Christmas. A time of cheer, goodwill, and nightmares. The Victorians didn't just celebrate with carols and eggnog, they mixed in a hearty dose of fear. Picture families cosing up by the fire, flipping through Krampus-themed storybooks while grimacing at illustrations of the beast-snatching children in the night. Jingle bells, indeed. You may think you're settling in for a quaint evening of gift-giving and merriment, only to stumble upon illustrations of Krampus hunched over a bag of misbehaving little ones. Families went from sweetly singing Silent Night to listening for shrieks in the distance, half wondering if those were the sounds of children embracing their fate. In a time when the streets of Victorian England were dimly lit by gas lamps and swathed in a fog thick enough to hide a lurking nightmare, the Krampus legend offered a twisted but effective lesson to children. That cosy fireplace wasn't just for warmth, it was also a staging ground for hand-wringing parental anxieties. If you don't finish your peas, Krampus might come for you, mothers would say, stoking fears that had more bite than a frosty winter night. It's amazing how an undercooked Brussels sprout could send a child sprinting for the safety of their pillows, convinced they heard the unmistakable sound of hooves on the roof. Krampus didn't simply toe the line between naughty and nice. He was the embodiment of Victorian parenting strategies, forget timeouts or gentle reprimands. When a child misbehaved, the spectre of Krampus ensured the consequence was more terrifying than the punishment itself. Remember, young Timothy, fathers would muse over a pint of ale, if you steal your sister's toys, Krampus will find you, and it won't be pretty. Nothing says family bonding like a collective shudder at the thought of being tossed into a sack and carted off to a land where the only holiday treats were cold bread and lumps of coal, each more psychologically scarring than the last. And let's not forget about the festivities that brought communities together. Krampus Night quickly became a gathering meant to bolster moral fortitude while secretly revelling in festive horror. Imagine townspeople parading down the streets, dressed as the very creature that haunted children's dreams, all while relishing in the glorious absurdity of it all. Adults laughed under masks meant to frighten. Meanwhile, kids crouched behind houses, unsure whether it was a night of celebration or a sick prank gone too far. Trust me, that creepily clad Krampus roaming the town sounded like a Halloween party gone awry, but with more gingerbread. Moreover, what made Krampus crucial for the social fabric was its subversive nod to the idea that maybe, just maybe, the world wasn't going to be a nice place to live as long as you had a bad attitude. The legend was a parenting strategy, wrapped in a spine-chilling fog of fun, reminding everyone that life and parenting isn't always merry. children, convinced they were seconds away from being hoisted aloft by a beastly creature, began to view their missteps. Who could blame them? It was every man, woman or child for themselves when Krampus threatened to transform their peaceful holiday into a whirlwind of chaos. Yet, even with this dance with dread, the holidays thrived in mirth. Victorians channeled their anxieties into festive traditions. They created cards featuring Krampus, illustrating him playfully caricaturized as the misunderstood menace, which taught valuable lessons about behavior while letting the parents trivialize their feelings of impending doom. What could be more festive than sending a loved one a holiday greeting showing Krampus mercilessly shaking a child out of a sack? Just another holiday card to add to the collection. Season's greetings they exchanged, alongside tales of terror that range from laughter to sheer horror. And so, the embodiment of Krampus, a creature steeped in terrifying folklore, blended well into the celebratory atmosphere. He was the elephant in the Victorian room, one part mythology, one part cautionary tale, rolled together with enough absurdity to make everyone chuckle nervously. Before you knew it, families would laugh and shiver as another year's worth of naughty or nice was evaluated, ensuring Krampus would live on through stories whispered during the most wonderful time of the year. So, as the carols fade into the night and the last ribbons are left untied, just remember the wise lesson of Krampus. Beneath the shadow of holiday cheer is a hint that sometimes the things we dread make the goodness all the more brighter, and with that we tip our hats and slide into our beds, where hopefully only Santa delivers. Welcome to the playground of Victorian parenting, where a loving touch often got traded for a dose of fear. Mothers didn't just hover over their children. Oh no, they made sure the threat of Krampus lurked like a shadow behind every well-behaved smile. Forget gentle nudges. These parents had their sights on behavioural blackmail. Why coax your child into good behaviour when you could tell them that a hulking half-goat creature would come for the misbehaved? I mean, have you ever tried explaining the virtues of honesty to a 5-year-old? Instead, why not offer a simple warning like, if you refuse to clean your room, Krampus will take you away. Just picture those little 6-year-olds shuffling their toys away like worried mice in a cheese factory. Take a moment to visualise the conversations over dinner. Junior, eat your Brussels sprouts or Krampus won't bring you presents. Forget the luxury of coaxing a child with love. You needed the kind of motivation that struck fear deep into their little hearts. It's as though Victorian parents were part-time educators and full-time scaremongers. They put sweet apples on the table and next to them a generous serving of active horror. Next time your child grumbles about finishing their vegetables, just imagine the impromptu Krampus history lesson you could drop on them. Who needs parenting books when you have centuries of folklore at your fingertips? And let's not forget the power plays during the holidays. Oh darling, you want that shiny new doll, just remember Krampus is watching. Picture kids wide-eyed and stuttering, wondering if they'd even make it to Christmas morning at all. Was it worth the risk? One night of disobedience could lead them straight into Krampus's claws rather than finding stockings stuffed with little trinkets. And those comforts, forget good children. They were like pieces of gold meant to keep the dark at bay. Besides, what child doesn't crave a little drama? In the lavish halls draped with red and green decorations, children weren't just prepping for a cheery Christmas. They were doing a little ballet with psychological warfare. The anticipation of a joyous holiday season mingled with the dread of being that one unfortunate child being whisked away by a half-man, half-beast entity. In the bustling streets, it wasn't uncommon to overhear dark-shrouded whispers among adults. Remember how young Thomas misbehaved? Poor lad, Krampus took him away. The parents nodded solemnly, revelling in their own theatrics as if the very presence of fear had sent shivers down their spines. And let's be real, after those tales, who needed a mattress when you could sleep atop fear-induced dreams? This environment cultivated a certain kind of child with iron will, or conversely, an overactive imagination that could stage an entire play about how Krampus became America's most misunderstood holiday figure. Honestly, if you think about it, Krampus had a better marketing team than your average chocolate Santa. Victorian families often sought profoundly serious resolutions for even the most minor of misbehaviours. Perhaps it was their way of compensating for the disarray of society around them, akin to dressing a parade of paupers in shiny coats while barking orders about staying well behaved. The streets were filled with the sounds of carriages and gaslights flickering, but at home, parents advertised stove-enforced horrors. Failure to conform to society's demands meant the looming presence of Krampus, and trust me, he didn't even require a letter of reference. The irony? As children grew up with these idiosyncratic ideas steeped in Victorian charm and horror, they realised they had traded whimsic whimsy for tight-lipped terror. In this curious fusion of concern and caution, they learned lessons under duress as the pitch-black night corners whispered, "Knock, knock, how did you behave today?" Krampus became a lasting example of parental ingenuity, a furry, fearsome consultant for the sake of keeping a lid on childhood chaos. You thought parenting was tough today? Imagine calling in a demonic force to negotiate with your toddler. Ultimately, this era of horror-styled parenting helped mould individuals who were cautious, yet resilient, playing the established social norms while respecting the danger that lurked in the corners of their minds. What more could a Victorian parent possibly want? A calm family unit, an air of proper conduct, and an entire monster to reinforce all of it. If only they'd known how wild we'd get with those tales in centuries to come. Dive into the ethics of the era, because being nice in the Victorian age came with the same gravitas as completing a 4-hour maze of death. The children faced more than bread-and-butter dilemmas. They had to dodge the claws of Krampus while desperately trying not to end up on the wrong side of the morality spectrum. It's an age where the wrong churlish behaviour could lead to more than just a maternal scolding. Real psychological warfare was taking place, and its enforcer was none other than this horned demon from far-off lands. Imagine tiny Victorian ankles trembling with fear of being tossed into a sack and whisked away into the realm of eternal whimpering. Everyday life for children back then could be compared to staring into the eye of a storm while balancing on a tightrope made of spit and threats. Getting it wrong could mean missing out on glowingly wrapped gifts left by St. Nicholas, or worse, being thrown to the smelly, shadowy depths of Krampus's lair. Just picture little ones sitting by a roaring fireplace, eyes wide like saucers, listening to parental whispers about naughtiness, with the kind of dread usually reserved for serial killer documentaries. In this precarious world, moral lessons became narratives steeped in suspense. And let's not downplay how cleverly parents manipulated this anxiety. Children had no choice but to live in constant fear of having their names checked against the unforgiving naughty or nice ledger. An uproarious laugh at a sibling's blunder. Naughty. Throwing a hissy fit over the last sweet. Naughty. Even complaining that Krampus was too scary during story time. You guessed it. Naughty as the devil himself. All of which led to a generation of children who mastered the art of feigning good behaviour with the seriousness of celebrity PR agents. Crafty little devils indeed. As parents sparred with their children's morals, those children were left confused and more than a little jaded. Can you imagine how they felt, bearing the weight of a year's worth of nice expectations, knowing that even the tiniest misstep could send them sailing straight into Krampus's grasp? No pressure. All this set the stage for a most riveting conundrum. how to be good while trying to navigate the treacherous waters of disobedience without actually committing a social faux pas. 'Twas the season to be jolly, unless you happened to be carrying around a backpack of unrepentant mischief. Now, fast forward to the Victorian parlours, where parents animatedly gathered, instructing their younglings to stay in line like tiny statues moulded from dough. As evening tales went, the grand narrative of nice versus naughty shifted seamlessly into social commentary, played out in front of the hearth. Here, Krampus acted as the ultimate tool for discipline, a boogeyman to stir the emotions and scorch the imagination. Children learned early on that disobedience didn't just lead to losing out on evening cakes, it could culminate in a fur-clad nightmare creeping through their shadows as Krampus prepared to scoop up their wayward souls. For the lucky children who remained in the nice category, rewards waited under the Christmas tree. Their gifts ranged from shiny toys to meticulously crafted books that promised educational enlightenment, all delivered courtesy of a beloved jolly old Saint Nick who made every young heart flutter. While on the other side of the equation, the naughty kids were simply left to ponder via terrifying tales of sack-bearing monstrosities who reigned too close for comfort. As holidays rolled around, the message from adult to child grew increasingly loud, clear, and borderline deranged. Morality became a theatrical performance, filled with elaborate dramatics and intense soul-searching. The slight balance tipped so far that children cowered under festive decorations, clutching their small gifts and wondering, am I good enough? The ongoing dilemma left many feeling like they were lobbying their cases in a medieval court rather than playing with marbles in their parlour. Was kindness always rewarded, or was it the veil that hidden their childish transgressions? Victoriously, enter Krampus, the retribution for every mischievous blink and naughty giggle, an eternal reminder that you could oscillate from hero to zero in the blink of an eye. This delightful creature served as both keeper and executioner of morals in Victorian society, putting a sharp juxtaposition in families between light-hearted baking and the threat of children's pristine beliefs being shattered by the mere mention of devilish deeds. At the end of day, this Victorian morality tale ridiculed the small and immense faults of childhood, while fervently cementing the idea that the road to maturity was paved with good intentions, or else they might just find themselves on Krampus's naughty list, waving goodbye to their beloved toys for an eternity, shackled in the depths of a demon's den. Who knew moral lessons could be wrapped in so much chaos and dread, creating a splendidly dysfunctional symphony of holiday season agony? Welcome to the confounding moral tapestry of the Victorian era, where naughty should really come with a blood-red warning label and nice felt like walking through a field of roses with a demon lurking nearby. Can you imagine waking up on Christmas morning, stoked for gifts only to be reminded that Krampus could grab you on the way out? It's like ordering a delicious dessert but being informed that a rancid sock is the surprise ingredient. Victorians balanced gifts and fear like pro-acrobats. Picture it. Children darting out of their creaky beds, eyes sparkling with hope and cocoa-induced chaos, only to feel a shiver as they recall the threats of lurking demons. One moment, you're envisioning shiny new toys, and the next, your imagination is gripped by nightmarish visions of Krampus dragging you off to his lair, both exhilarating and terrifying. In this precarious dance of holiday merriment, the value of each gift hung in the air like the scent of overcooked goose. Was it truly a joyous occasion when the threat of being snatched up and put into a sack coiled around your little heart like a tightening noose? Yes, those brightly wrapped packages looked enticing, and the allure of candy canes and fresh gingerbread filled the room. Yet, Even in the midst of such holiday revelry, cautious parents would still whisper the cautionary tales of Krampus over the crackling fire, serving both admonition and decoration. "Be good, darling, or the Krampus will pay you a visit," they warned, as if the fierce horned fellow was chowing down right outside the door. And let's not forget the communal aspect of all this. Families gathered for feasts, laughter raucously bouncing off the walls, while the ghost of Krampus loomed ominously in the background. It wasn't just about individual families, entire communities came together for Krampus night, revelling in the spirit of holiday horror. Picture mothers laughing over eggnog while trying to convince their children the good children could safely receive the gifts without the dark shadow of Krampus creeping up on them. Meanwhile, fathers sported uncomfortable smirks, desperate to suppress their laughter at their children's terrified faces, a true holiday sight to behold. Victorian children were not raised in a world of candy-coated promises and optimism. They were educated through tales of caution against overindulgence and brattishness. Every gift bore the weight of responsibility. You think your new toy is fun? Better appreciate it while you can, lest Krampus come swinging by. An innocent doll for a day could later transform into an uncanny reminder of your misdeeds. Imagining Krampus lurking outside, cloaked in darkness, waiting for any sign of mischief, kept those children's hearts pounding, louder than the church bells on Christmas morning. However, as every child quickly learned, there was not just fear to contend with, but also joy in the present moment. Can you blame them for wanting that gift from dear old Santa, even while dread lingered like an uninvited guest? This emotional tug-of-war became a rite of passage. Generations of children learned how to balance their expectations, practicing gratitude and compliance during celebratory family gatherings. It was like a gymnast balancing on a beam, where each gift came with the responsibility of maintaining good behaviour. And what about those ghastly loyalty tests? Picture a child shining on Christmas morning. They rush to open their gifts, each unwrapping ceremony filled with more suspense than the unveiling of the town's fanciest Christmas pudding. But just as they grasp the joy of newfound treasures, the grim spectre of consequences could drop in at any moment. Those long Victorian languid evenings turned into tales of Krampus, a way to disguise moral lessons like artists hiding paint strokes under layers of intricate patterns. What truly defined this holiday duality was resilience, the human spirit wrapped in thick layers of festive fabric, transcending fear to embrace warmth and joy. Children would alternate between being squealing bundles of joy and quaking in their boots all within the same hour. After all, they lived in a world riddled with danger and delight. So, while Victorians practiced their duality of joy, gifts mingled with grief. They forged a legacy, a peculiar amalgamation of wonder and worry that shaped the holiday illustrations decorating children's nightmares. And somehow, amid all the anxiety, the traditions endured, tales prevailed, laughter echoed, and the legacy of joyful fear marched on. Nothing quite like a holiday season where the true spirit of the season presented you with both gifts and a dose of heart-pounding horror. Picture it now. It's Christmas Eve. You've been good all year long, right? Or do you just regret sneaking that last cookie? The night is thick with anticipation, and you can almost hear Krampus sharpening his claws just outside your window. It's the festive season. A time for joy, laughter, and the inescapable dread that comes with the threat of a horned demon nicknamed the Christmas Devil. Santa may be sliding down chimneys wearing a smile, while Krampus waits patiently, probably rolling his eyes, eager to turn your holiday cheer into a reality show disaster for the ages. As you huddle under your covers, letting your imagination run wild, would you really sleep soundly during the night before Christmas, knowing there's a chance you could end up in a burlap sack? Not even the warmest cocoa can do much against that kind of anxiety. The children of the Victorian era understood the stakes all too well, balancing the thrill of potential presence with a very real concern of nocturnal mischief leading them straight into Krampus's clutches. That newly constructed naughty list could carry some heavy consequences, don't you think? Could you really hear Krampus's heavy footsteps slinking through the snow just outside? What if he'd already dropped in on the neighbour's kids? Were they sharing some cookies in a desperate attempt at appeasement? It's safe to say the excitement of Christmas rolled over into a layer of paranoia thicker than the winter snow itself. Parents grew adept at crafting elaborate tales, filled with tempers, tricks, and yes, a bit of terror, in order to ensure their young charges remained on the nice end of the spectrum. Forget candy canes. The only flavour on the menu tonight is fear mixed with a dash of uncertainty. Let's say you heard rustling outside. Perhaps it's just the wind, or maybe it's that squirrel who's been eyeing your last chocolate-covered treat. But in the minds of Victorian kiddos, that rustling could easily morph into the sound of demonic hooves, or the chain-rattling antics of Krampus rummaging through your garden. You were never just listening for Santa's jingle bells. You were also trying to decode if Krampus was prepping to pick you up for his next career as your new roommate in a swampy cavern. Delightful. Throughout the night, kids would snugly tuck themselves in bed, hiding beneath piles of scratchy blankets now more than familiar with the scent of unwashed wool. This was hardly the cosy, glowing scene one might envision. It was a battle of wills. Will sleep come first, or will the anticipation of dearly wished gifts overpower their terror-filled thoughts? Instead of sweet lullabies, they resorted to counting sheep. Instead of visions of sugar plums, there was an overwhelming craving for a cushion against the consequences of their minor mischiefs. Meanwhile, in another room, parents sat on the edge of their seats, sipping their eggnog, while sharing delighted whispers about their own childhood brush-ups with Krampus. Did they surpass the holiday spirit by joining the Krampus hunting club in town? Were there members who still carried scars from those too close encounters with the holiday beast? Kids today just don't understand how good they have it, they'd say, shaking their heads in a blend of nostalgia and parental obligation. Throughout the house, tinsel hung, ornaments shimmered, and in the back of every child's mind echoed one thought. Will it be the toys or the terror? Who really gets the last word? Maybe it was a rite of passage, a baptism by fear on the eve of Christmas, ensuring that youth wouldn't just learn the intrinsic values of kindness but also the consequences of misbehaviour, for seasonal shenanigans left unchecked. As kids kept their eyes peeled wide for both presence and perceived danger, they trained themselves to listen carefully for that subtle yet menacing growl. Perhaps they too silently prayed for Santa's swift arrival, as much for the gifts as for the handful of sugar to diffuse the tension lingering in the air. Krampus, their unseen adversary, loomed large, his mere myth sending shivers down their little spines, and ever so quietly the countdown began. Finally, morning could break. The light would fill the rooms, and with it, the unlikely alliance of wonder and dread would reveal its cards. Yes, once Christmas morning dawned, it would be impossible to tell who'd slept the best, and who had to scrape the remnants of childhood innocence left behind by Krampus's looming shadow. Little did they know that mingling fear would sweetly intertwine with the joy of the season, a unique delight that only the Victorian sociopaths could conjure up. So, as you settle in tonight, remember, beneath every pillow's comfort of fluff lies a hidden bite of fear, the delight of Krampus creeping ever closer, ensuring you think twice before reaching for that last cookie. Enter the Victorian home where siblings craft their finest tales, not about fairest of fairy tales, but about how Krampus almost devoured their most beloved toys. In this world, sibling rivalries branch out into the realm of horror storytelling, with the latest scare constantly topping the last. Picture a dimly lit parlour where the flickering gaslights cast ominous shadows on the walls, subtly hinting at the mischief yet to unfold. With every knocked-over chair and spilled glass of warm cider, a game begins. The stakes? Your treasured toy might just get plucked from your grip by the infamous horned beast himself. Imagine the eldest sibling, armed with the unwillingness to concede to anything less than absolute terror, sharpening their stories like daggers. Just last night, they would start, eyes gleaming with mischief. I heard a scratching at the window. It was Krampus, looking for naughty little boys and girls to whisk away in his sack. He'll take you straight to his lair and swap you for coal. The younger siblings, wide-eyed and shivering, would gather closer, torn between glee and abject horror, every snicker battling against nervous giggles as imagination spiraled into a frenzy. Was that scratching at the window the wind, or perhaps the hoofbeats of Krampus drawing nearer? Now let's be clear, these weren't just idle tales. Fear was a family currency. A sound foundation built of horror meant that playful tormenting saw no end. A strategic whisper could become a weapon in the game, as long as they promised to avoid turning bedtime into a horrific wailing twist. Did someone really pull a prank by hiding the family's everyday bread like some warped treasure hunt? Or was it an attempt at a bona fide Krampus tribute? Those familial antics would capture the evenings like fumbles in a spin-the-bottle game, cheeky and earnest all at once. Not to be outdone, siblings crafted terrifying and creative remedies. The idea that Krampus would come for not only the naughty but also the greedy was all too powerful. A strategic deployment of toys meant splashing out the narrative. That growing band of ragged stuffed critters could serve not just as beloved companions, but as brave warriors against the beast in the night. "If the Krampus comes for you," little Timmy would chime in, gripping his stuffed bear, "we'll stand our ground. He won't dare take our beloved Stuffington." So began an armament of stitching and hidden socks to fortify their nighttime defences. But beyond mere games, sibling rivalries forged alliances too. If young Eugene heard Harriet whispering about a Krampus sighting in the schoolyard, could they for a moment put aside all grievances for the sake of thwarting this communal terror? They might have bickered over last stitches in their satchel bags mere moments before, yet now they were united against the looming spectre of a horned fiend. Of course, jealousy-fueled drama. The sibling who received the season's most desirable toy would practically wear a crown, or, in the eyes of Krampus, a target. Younger Franklin, who received a shiny new wooden horse from a doting aunt, triggered waves of theatrical despair from his siblings as they proclaimed their united plight. "Would it be better to be Krampus's new pet than to watch you prance about with that horse?" they would lament. It was a constant cycle of unending chaos, one that feigned camaraderie while quietly forging new rivalries. As night deepened, the myth of Krampus wove tightly into the fabric of their playful lies. The very act of scaring one another transformed into a rite of passage. They began checking each other's closets for signs of Krampus's bags, drawing massive X's over the places they kept toys stashed away. "I'll keep your guitar safe, but you promise I'm not on Krampus's list." It was the whispers and shrieks echoing through closed doors that ultimately reinforced those familial bonds, leaving them chuckling long after the spell of fear burned out. So, in these charming yet chaotic homes, horror storytelling became an essential pastime that blurred the boundaries between fun and fear, imagining Krampus both in its chilling form and the comforting shadow of childhood play. It was more than just sibling rivalry. It was ultimately a classic game of tactics in which stories were both weapons and shields, allowing generations to carry the eerie laughter of devious childhood magic, echoing long into adulthood. Thus, Krampus wasn't merely a spectre to be feared, but a catalyst for unforgettable memories, twisted, horrifying, and delightfully absurd. Let's tip our hats to Victorian women who safeguarded their little ones by utilising the mighty Krampus as a cautionary tale. Mothers became the original storytellers, while daughters dutifully absorbed the horror of the demon who loomed large in their midst. Picture this: a cosy parlour illuminated by flickering gaslight, where the air thickens with tales of Krampus, wrapped snugly under a woolen blanket, sipping on a cup of what could generously be called tea. Layer upon layer of maternal wisdom and fear wrapped around children like a cosy, albeit terrifying, living lesson plan. But who exactly were these mothers? What motivated them to frighten the daylights out of their kids? Well, Victorian mothers were less of the cookie-baking, soft-spoken types and more of the "your behaviour determines whether Krampus will visit you" variety. It was a time when children were seen and not heard, unless they were screaming about the lurking horror that could haul them off to the depths of despair. These women threw their children into a world of child-rearing, steeped in a cocktail of fear and discipline. They expertly wielded storytelling as a parenting tool, much like you might use a wooden spoon, for both cooking and as a possible source of discipline when little Timmy misbehaved. Imagine a young girl, eyes wide, sitting at her mother's feet as she leans in close to share tales of the Christmas demon. "The Krampus can sniff out naughty little children," the mother would say, channeling her inner villain. "He'll stuff you in his sack and carry you away until you learn to behave." Little Annabelle, listening, would glance furtively at the shadows in the corners, half expecting a horned figure to emerge from hiding. But far from being purely frightful, these stories served a dual purpose. They were entertainment and heeded warnings, carefully crafted to not only keep kids in line, but also to enhance the shared cultural tension around obedience and morality. Daughters often learned the intricacies of these tales from the sources themselves, elevating their role as future mothers by simply absorbing those narratives. Imagine little Jane playing the lead role in her own adaptation of The Night Krampus Came, frantically tossing pillows around to create a fearsome beast, while simultaneously relaying the safety lessons learned at her mother's knee. It was like acting school, but with higher stakes. If you don't clean your room, the Krampus will find you. Not quite Oedipus Rex, but hey, the message got across in spades. Victorian women didn't just nod along to the tradition, they breathed new life into it. Their creativity and flair for dramatics meant more than just passing the tales down. They spiced them up with personal touch. Well, dear, nothing says goodnight like a quick reminder about the monstrous creature waiting in the dark. Such allegories for life lessons were predominant, making for a bedtime story that was as enchanting as it was haunting. And let's not forget how these mothers shaped the very fabrics of society. They fostered a sense of community, exchanging the latest tales of Krampus with neighbours during gossip-laden tea parties, their laughter twinkling like frost in the winter air. These gatherings solidified shared fears. Good-natured competition emerged about whose child was more likely to outsmart Krampus with excellent behaviour. Sibling rivalry wasn't just relegated to toys. It blossomed into the art of being the most obedient child. Moreover, this narrative isn't just a dead relic of the past. The legacy these mothers left behind influenced how future generations would frame their family traditions. Imagine your grandmother whispering to you about the consequences of mischief, using themes spun from Krampus lore that persisted as tales of caution even into the present. It was like a family heirloom, but with a side serving of spine-tingling terror. So, as we settle into a cosy spirit, contemplating the evolution of storytelling and parenting through the lens of Krampus, Let's honour the mothers who proved that the night might be dark and full of monsters, but a dash of fear surely kept their families in line, consciously linking generations with both laughter and shivers. Because in the grand tapestry of Victorian life, the Krampus narrative unwound itself, spun by the hands of women who nurtured both fear and laughter, ensuring that the legend would live on, just like that supposed lump of coal your aunt might have hidden in the corner as a joke. You can't make this up, folks. It's time to discuss the Victorian fathers, mighty figure strollers who preferred axes over hugs and folklore over bedtime stories. These fathers passed down terrifying warnings about Krampus, while keeping faces stern and sensing that no amount of coal would work as a gift for misbehaving children. If you were a Victorian child, the looming presence of your father was about as comforting as sharing a blanket with a wasp. Want to misbehave? Sure, but be prepared for the dramatic retelling of how Krampus would drag you to his lair right after he made you finish your dinner first. Imagine this: the evening fire crackling in the hearth, its flickering flames casting eerie shadows on the walls, and there you are, suddenly aware that every tale Dad spun was less a whimsical story and more a strategic warning that anything beyond simply breathing incorrectly could summon Krampus. You stayed at the table, fork poised, intrigued halfway between dread and disbelief, hoping against hope that your father's chilling tales of a horned horror would spare you from the monster himself. Spoiler alert, they never worked as intended. On top of that, Victorian fatherhood needed to tread the fine line between nurturing and horror-mongering. Such tricky balances required a keen sense of timing. A father could easily transform from a mild-mannered provider to the fearsome beast himself with an artfully timed scowl that could rival even the most imposing ghoul. "You'll see Krampus if you don't stop wiggling at the dinner table," he warned, eyes narrowing. You'd swallow your peas, but the anxiety would creep back up like a bad penny, until you were convinced your potholes in the yard might just be Krampus's hiding spots. These over-the-top warnings about Krampus were not entirely unfounded, of course. In a world layered with harsh realities of poverty and despair, it was only natural for fathers to lean into the fantastical to discourage mischief. Think about it. It's the 19th century, and your prospects for a comfortable lifestyle include living in a dingy house with creaky floors and a roof that leaks during every rainstorm. What better way to keep the kids in line than to mention the existence of a demonic creature who loved nothing more than whisking misbehaving children off to a world of permanent coal lumps and eternal regret? If you manage to stumble through your childhood without being devoured by Krampus, congratulations, dear listener. But that wouldn't stop your father from casually tossing out the threat over a hearty breakfast of porridge. Don't finish that, and you might end up in a sack by sunrise, he would growl. It was parenting at its finest, with just the right amount of exaggerated fright to keep the little ones in check. Just imagine a slightly terrifying paternal figure looming over your breakfast table while you tried to chew your soggy oats, half-heartedly counting your blessings that your dad wasn't just plucking an unwashed sock from the floor, but also genuinely threatening the spectre of Krampus. Yet somehow the father's commitment to legacy didn't end at the dinner plate. Oh no! They were often seen leading the charge in Krampus celebrations, roaring drunken laughter as they donned frightening masks and marched through the streets with their fellow comrades. Picture this: a dozen burly Victorian dads traipsing through town with a cautionary tool belt of Scandinavian nightmares, the Krampus Scare Brigade, just so the neighbours could see the delightfully horrific lengths they would go to ensure their children stayed on the right path. It was in this brash, boisterous camaraderie that the fathers not only asserted their masculinity, but also embraced the holiday's peculiar charm. quaffing strong ales one minute while sharing raucous tales of Krampus's exploits the next. They became stewards of fear and festivity, ensuring their children were reminded with the utmost theatricality that behaving yourself was critical. Behaviour modification by shivering terror. It seems somewhat counterintuitive, but hey, if it worked. As each father spun tales and donned costumes, one thing was clear. Krampus wasn't just a seasonal villain. It became a vessel of manhood, allowing fathers to connect with their children through the handheld tool of shared fear, much like boys bonding through harmless frolics on the playground. You'd better believe these fathers took a certain level of pride in their chilling associations with Krampus, fully revelling in the fast official fathering trend that mixed paternal love with enough fright to shake the feathers out of an unsuspecting bird. Thus, these strong echoes of masculinity intertwined with Krampus lore didn't just vanish. They lingered on like the flickering shadows cast by the fireside, having transmuted into memory, tradition, and above all, an amusing look back at how dads cleverly crafted nightmares into life lessons. Now, as you drift off, may you feel gratitude for the gods of modern parenting, where bedtime stories generally come without the haunting spectre of coal-laden sacks and horned monstrosities lurking around every corner. Sweet dreams, dear listener. Krampus might be taking the night off. Why stay rooted in a single tale? The Krampus mythos borrowed generously from folklore across Europe, so let's journey through time and pay tribute to stories that made parents' hairs stand on end while making children question their life choices. Krampus wasn't just a local phenomenon. He was a seasoned traveller who lifted bits and pieces from neighbouring traditions like a crafty pickpocket in a festive market. In Austria, he strolled alongside St. Nicholas, a sacrificial lamb to a benevolent shepherd but still terrifying enough to haunt the dreams of any child standing too close to a chimney. Picture kids standing wide-eyed, one staring up at the jolly old man while the other peeked nervously over their shoulder, expecting Krampus to poke out from behind a Christmas tree, ready to snag them with a crooked finger. This whole blend in or be eaten approach to folklore was all the rage back in the day. Tales of other scary figures circulated like gossip in a church hall, suggesting that Krampus had some wild cousins roaming around. In Germany, the Belsnickel, a fur-clad figure who threatened minor misbehaviours with coal or a good whip, gathered smoke and haze from the fires of the Krampus tradition. Just when you thought you were safe with Santa, you got slapped with a snowy spank of Belsnickel, leaving you to reconsider that sneaky cookie theft from the pantry. Wait a minute, you'd think. So I'm getting presents but also a stern talking to from the hulking terror hiding just beyond the door? What did I even do wrong? Steal the last gingerbread cookie? Now, let's not forget about the Slavic regions, where the equally terrifying Mikula Seljaninowicz roamed like a cousin who showed up uninvited to every holiday. He didn't merely threaten to carry away misbehaving children, he threw them into his magical sack and forced them to work in the depths of some mythical, overwhelming existence. What were kids supposed to think? If I don't share my toy train, I'll be stuck doing horrendous chores for years under the scowl of a moody ogre. Great. The tension was palpable at family gatherings, where every parent made it slightly too obvious that they were ready to dunk their misbehaving offspring into the Krampus sack for some harsh discipline. Talk about adding a little spice to the family dinner. Meanwhile, in Greece, you had the Kallikantzaroi, a delightfully chaotic troupe of creatures who only come out at Christmas and brought the concept of mischief to a whole new level. These woodland goblins, with their penchant for twerking around the house during the holiday season, flipped traditional ideas of holiday merriment. Mischief became twofold. Traditional home decor included layers of garlic to ward off evil spirits, but little did kids know their terrible behaviour at home could summon not just Krampus, but Kallikantzaroi waiting to ambush, bettering their trades by the hour. You could barely set foot into a room without stepping in some soot or wrapping paper from havoc-drenched holiday spirit. Krampus also found his most mischievous inspirations in the Nordic regions, where ancient tales of Perchten, magical creatures often confused with Krampus, circulated like watered-down mulled wine. If Krampus was the medium of dread, these figures graced the territory of joyous terror. Likewise laced with horns and wintry demeanour, the Perchten blended festive joy with a touch of peril, dimming the candlelight during carolling. Imagine children trying to join in harmonising to Silent Night, while hearing the echoes of something darker just beyond the pine-studded curtains. The sheer thrill mixed with unease was as captivating as it was spine-tingling, a combination that keeps modernity at bay and our inner recommendation to avoid bad apples ahead of the schedule in check. The sharing of these stories from across Europe helped to build a dynamic, evolving narrative tapestry, all while illustrating cultural reflections of the fears and expectations placed on children throughout their upbringing. Parents, with perhaps a smidge of horror in their tone, could share tales that did more than just provide fear. They offered lessons while instilling dread. Yet there within these frightening narratives lay a fragment of shared humanity, one where even Krampus, once a mere tale, turned into a national symbol of love, protection, and concern. After all, who doesn't want their children to feel a little terror mixed with family warmth? So the next time you find yourself listening to a nightmarish tale of Krampus, remember he's not merely stealing your sleep, he's weaving together a complex cultural fabric that combines horror, folklore, and a little good-natured old-fashioned scare for generations, ensuring that the lessons of mischief linger on in an ever-evolving dance of terror and cheer. And as you drift into slumber tonight, spare a thought for that likely overworked Krampus, forever given the job of keeping the misbehaving ones in line while bestowing upon the rest a gift of bittersweet nostalgia, entwined with the fierce roots of tradition. Victorian artists took to their canvases, giving Krampus a face that can shake you awake even in your sweetest dreams. Imagine parents flipping through illustrations that made their kids spill milk everywhere, realizing Krampus was lurking right behind them, saying, "Hey, you." The absurdity of it all is that these children would never look at their cereal the same way again. If they prolonged their procrastination on chores, one glance at the latest Krampus artwork, fanged smile, horns poised like an overzealous elf, would have them diving headfirst into laundry piles like a cat squaring off against a cucumber. These artists flourished during a time when the line between a fairy tale and a horror story blurred easily, like blending flour and water into a smooth paste. The illustrations were meticulously crafted, with Krampus usually depicted as a monstrous figure within a vividly ominous backdrop. One could hardly escape the horned panic looming over the quaint winter landscapes. Each snowflake seemingly hangs in mid-air, hoping it could freeze the chaos below. As children gazed in awe, eyes wide, mouths agape, they were unwitting participants in the grand conspiracy of parental tactics against misbehaviours. Picture this: a Victorian child flipping over a beautifully illustrated book just to find Krampus carrying a sack bulging with hooded children. A surefire guarantee that bedtime would come early and peacefully one way or another. Quite the plot twist for kids who'd hoped for Santa's whirlwind of gifts. The town's art galleries were practically exhibitions of terror, featuring works that had parents trading tips about how to make Krampus work for you. The canvas was a battlefield, with each brushstroke allowing artists to paint their interpretation of Krampus's menace, an interpretation that was as fluid as the design of undergarments in a children's storybook. From a subtle grimace to an all-out scare fest, The artistic representations of Krampus evoked a spectrum of emotions, sometimes even prompting spontaneous prayers for good behaviour. Suddenly, the family dog had a new rival for affection. The wallpaper mural of Krampus staring into the room with an expression that was a mix of amusement and predation. But how did artists ensure that Krampus became the ultimately influential figure in Victorian Christmas lore? They added flamboyant touches that evoked a sense of instant nostalgia for better days. Days long gone when children merely fretted about losing their marbles rather than risking their limbs to a horned demon. The use of shadow play was exquisite, layering darkness around Krampus, creating a haunting silhouette that nearly spoke 1,000 words. Maybe it was the artist's family dinners that inspired depictions of Krampus sitting at the table, like the uninvited relative with existential dread waiting to ruin a good time. Can we imagine an absurd world where Krampus inspired podcasts about iconic villains? While other demons receded into the background, Krampus leapt into stardom, more colourful and festive than the most garish Christmas lights. As artists joined in an unholy frenzy, families invariably adopted the imagery for holiday cards, a bold suggestion to give multiple generations a holiday scare that was both fashionable and entertaining. "See you next year, Merry Krampus," they seemed to say. Even nursery rooms weren't exempt. Who could resist art that combined early learning with existential terror? Imagine a nursery where children count Krampi, yes, the plural of Krampus, instead of sheep, clinging to their blankets while managing nightly nightmares as children's prayers often devolved into Krampus watch. Will he snatch me? Or maybe he's off to get sister, brotherly insecurities at their finest. In this marketplace of nightmares, Victorian artists successfully showed that Krampus wasn't merely a threat. Instead, he became a playful reminder to behave. This was, after all, a time when keeping children in line required a bit of public shaming and the occasional mythological monster on the loose. And there we have it. Victorian artists, armed with paintbrushes and imagination, turned a quaint little nightmare into a holiday tradition, ensuring that the spirit of Krampus would be as perennial as that questionable fruitcake crusted with elaborately moulded horror. In the following segments, we'll take a closer look at everything from sibling rivalry, over horrifying storytelling, to how parents integrated Krampus into their households, making it clear that every bough of holly has a dark story just waiting to give a gentle nudge to naughtiness. So keep that mug of bedtime cocoa close, and don't be surprised if you find your milk rapidly vanishing from the fridge, much like those children of yore who crossed the Krampus. Picture a turf war between two holiday heavyweights, good old Santa Claus and the sly Krampus. A sort of good versus evil narrative, but the stakes are much higher. One brings toys, the other a slap of dread. You might want to choose wisely. It's a classic dilemma. Be good for Santa, or face the consequences with Krampus, who won't just leave you cold, but might also drag you off to some shadowy underworld. Forget the nice list. If you're naughty, the real present might just be an eternity of getting chased by someone who has a penchant for hooting in the night like he's on a creepy carnival ride. Imagine being a kid, going to bed filled with sugar and dreams of sugar plums, only to think about what that meant for your chances on Christmas morning. Everyone's heard of Santa's iconic sleigh, but have you ever visualised Krampus scraping his claws against your bedroom window, plotting your downfall? It's like the difference between waking up to a warm stack of pancakes or a face full of sour milk. Talk about Christmas spirit gone wrong. Now let's break it down. Santa, with his jolly laugh and belly that jiggles like a bowl full of jelly, embodies festivity and the cheer of giving. But don't forget, this isn't your sweet grandma's version of Christmas. Santa is still a bit unnerving. A grown man sneaking into your house while you're sleeping? Let the stranger danger cultural commentary commence. But then, right on cue, Krampus shows up all horned and fur-covered. Because what better way to teach your children about consequences than through a creature who makes your worst nightmares seem like holiday cheer? The truth is, both of these characters share a common purpose, one that cuts across time, geography, and definitely parental judgment. They were both tasked with upholding a balance of good behaviour. Santa's method is endless gift-giving. But Krampus? He prefers the intervention of fear. If being nice gets you chocolate, being naughty gets you a future of unpleasant gifts, a black rock, an empty sack, or, worse, an eternity stuck in his cave doing the dishes. Talk about a holiday cluster. The question then becomes, why were parents so eager to align themselves with one demon while hailing the hero Santa? Fast forward through history, where many Victorian families eagerly shared both fashions, sometimes encouraging kids to believe in neither. Parents steered tales of Krampus as a frightful deterrent to encourage good behaviour while stuffing stockings with candy from Santa. I mean, are they seriously that different? Krampus is basically Santa with a slightly worse hair day and a considerably more terrifying wardrobe. How would you like to wake up and realise you were being watched by someone who forgot to invest in a nice outfit? As the legend of Krampus spread like cold butter over warm toast, the holidays began to crystallise into a tug-of-war between safety and chaos. Even the decorations hung in homes were overshadowed by the omnipresent spectre of Krampus, lurking just beyond the mistletoe. While parents decorated with tinsel and glitter, the threat of Krampus was the driving force behind that holiday cheer. Be good for Santa, or risk winding up in Krampus's sack. It's effectively the first ever social media warning. Be good, or be ghosted by your benefactor. However, it wasn't just fear that defined who these holiday figures represented. They emerge from a rich tapestry woven with the threads of misbehaviour, moral instruction, and, let's face it, Victorian societal pressures. Let's for a moment consider how absurdly relatable it is that Krampus roams beyond harmless fright. He reflects that part of all of us, the nagging guilt after stealing a cookie from the jar or not sharing your toys with your siblings. Those moments could spark a blood feud rivaling the best Shakespearean plays. It's this comedic push and pull, teetering on the edge of who gets presents and who gets an uptick in anxiety, that made both Santa and Krampus vital parts of the holiday lore. So while Santa is busy taunting us with his authoritarian jolliness, Krampus swiftly became the reality check we didn't know we needed. Whether you found solace in Santa or braced yourself against Krampus, one thing remains certain. Both served reminders to tread lightly through the holiday season, lest you earn a devilish letter from the Krampus Club. There's no denying the terrifying thrill of this duel. It's a compelling reminder that every holiday celebrates joy and sorrow hand in hand, ultimately proving that good can wear a joyful mask, while the depths of evil can lurk just out of sight. So, dear listeners, as you settle down for a cosy evening, remember that while Santa may stuff the stockings, Krampus is still lurking in the shadows, ready to remind everyone that this naughty and nice business isn't just for show, it's a way of life. Who knew Krampus was taught in schools? This duality of gift and lurking fear travelled across continents faster than a viral TikTok dance. The absurdity of expecting children all over to be on high alert during the cheerier season is an international phenomenon. Imagine little Timmy in the quaint British countryside whispering, "Did you hear? Santa brings presents if you're good, but Krampus drags you to his lair if you're bad." Cringy shivers run down spines as they envision being stuffed into a sack, all because they didn't share their toys. How's that for a Christmas spirit lift? Now, let's take a quick jaunt across Europe, where the Krampus conundrum wasn't just sitting pretty in Austria or Germany. It was busy spreading like a delightful combination of folklore and fear at summer camp. Schools began to incorporate Krampus into holiday celebrations, without realizing they were basically hosting an elaborate horror show. Picture teachers dressed in homemade Krampus costumes, looming over unsuspecting students yelling, "When you misbehave, I'll summon the demon." Right, because nothing says well-adjusted adult like deciding to live in fear, including a Krampus costume that seems better suited for a Halloween party. As word spread about this mischievous fiend, countries found ways to incorporate Krampus into their varied cultural festivities. The joyous celebrations of St. Nicholas morphed into a joyous whirlwind of nerve-wracking gifts and heart-racing terrors. You could be devouring your gingerbread house while secretly contemplating whether that mysteriously empty Christmas stocking was left for you or the dreaded Krampus. Can you imagine a wider range of emotions around a single holiday? Fast forward a little more, and we find ourselves in modern homes where parents proudly exclaim, "Our family celebrates Christmas with Krampus." Imagine their children sitting wide-eyed, soaking up every spine-tingling detail from the family folklore. This joyful tradition has multi-generational roots, but come on, is there a less comforting lesson than behave or the monster will come for you? Children today might even kick back and ask, "So Mum, is Krampus coming over for dinner?" with the same casualness as discussing the neighbour's new dog. This hilariously absurd cultural adoption led to even more variations. In the United States, Krampus started appearing on Christmas cards, much to the confusion of holiday shoppers who thought they had accidentally wandered into a fire sale of fright. "Wish you a Merry Christmas and may Krampus spare you" quickly became the go-to phrasing for Victorian greeting cards. That awkward moment must have resulted in some truly bizarre looks at the office holiday party, where mere mention of the horned fiend sent colleagues scrambling to the punch bowl, desperately trying to drown out their manic laughter. Then, of course, there were the festivals. The festivals! As if conjuring a peak horror flick, people began celebrating Krampus with parades, complete with revved-up revellers donning horns, heavy wooden birch bark switches and animal skins, making every corner of the town feel like a prelude to a full-blown scare. With makeshift horns attached, families took to the streets on Krampus night, the air thick with fright and laughter. If you looked closely, you could spot parents trying to hide trembling children's faces behind their skirts whenever a looming horned creature approached. Amid the giggles and screams, we can't ignore the underlying lesson here. Krampus served to remind children of boundaries while adding an unscripted layer of humour to the wintry celebrations. While they delivered a message of morality and social norms, who'd have thought children today would Google Krampus memes in the spirit of cultural inclusivity? In fact, many adults have embraced this dank, delightful tradition with a twist, turning the Krampus saga into an unanticipated holiday blockbuster, complete with costumes and gatherings laden with the scent of baked goods and a festive blend of faux terror. And through it all, generations have woven the tale of Krampus into their cultural consciousness. So, year after year, as children dodge both coal-filled stockings and tales of a horned demon waiting in the dark, we can all agree there's something beautifully absurd about striking fear and joy at the heart of a single holiday season. Who knew being spooked could be such fun? Celebrate Krampus night? Yes, your ears aren't failing you. In the thick of Victorian revelry, Krampus night became a wild blend of frolicking revellers, active parents, and dreadful costumes that made it hard to tell who was actually scaring who throughout the festivities. Imagine a street filled with laughter, music, and just enough malevolence to make you wonder if you should have gone to bed early. Families donned the most outrageous Krampus paraphernalia they could conjure. Horns, fur, and tails that looked like they were borrowed from the neighbourhood goat. In a way, it was a bizarre form of social therapy, Let's collectively confront our fears and have a good laugh while doing it. You might picture it like this. Victorian children peeking out from beneath their blankets, wide-eyed and quaking, checking their knickerbockers for Krampus's looming form. Meanwhile, parents strutted about in their makeshift costumes, a fearsome blend of festive joy and impending fright. Some mothers dressed up as Krampus, confident they could sell the scare without actually scaring their children into oblivion. "Why, yes, dear," they'd say. "This is a deeply educational experience about good behaviour," while simultaneously giving their children the side-eye. To fully appreciate this cultural phenomenon, we must travel back to the early days of Krampus night. Think of the excitement that buzzed through the air, thicker than the fog rolling in from the Thames. Street vendors peddled hot chestnuts and mulled wine, while others sold miniature fur dolls, just in case sweet little Emily decided to ignore her mother's warnings. Behave, or Krampus will get you. It was like the Victorian version of "You better watch out," and trust me, it worked. On this evening, groups of costumed friends formed parades, bumping into each other with abandon, unsure if the goal was to get more laughs or genuine screams. Picture a frenzied display of Krampus-wielding adults chasing giggling children down the cobblestone streets, occasionally misstepping on the way to their potential doom. It was a chaotic game of tag where the stakes felt Shakespearean, with parents overdramatically lamenting, "Alas, my sweet child, you've been claimed by the Krampus." Cue the gasps from friends nearby. But the night didn't solely revolve around prankster joy. This was also a night for serious introspection about moral behaviour. Amid the revelry, whispers of fear echoed, "What would Krampus do to the naughty ones?" As children watched their peers dressed as the legendary beast, they could almost hear him chuckling mischievously. It wasn't uncommon for a child to spot their friend nibbling on a forbidden sweet, only to explode with an exaggerated gasp, declaring, "Krampus is watching!" Imagine the blame shifting, parents nervously glancing around, unsure whether to laugh or intervene. The owned chaos provided cautionary lessons built on humour and horror. And let's not ignore the competitive edge that crept in. Children dared each other to approach the scariest Krampus figures, treating the evening's festivities like a local haunted house competition gone awry. Prizes for bravery promised to be grand, and the outcome was an electrifying mixture of terror and exhilaration. What better way to bond over life's myriad challenges than taunting a horned monster? Conquer your fears completely, and maybe, just maybe, you'd earn the right to receive gifts rather than soot. As the evening rolled on, lamps flickered against the chilly night air, their glow casting eerie shadows that danced like Krampus himself across the cobblestones. Haggard yet gleeful parents threw in a karaoke-like twist. If you can run faster than Krampus, you might just make it home. Instead of bedtime stories about sugar plums, children would head back tucked beneath their covers, full of Krampus-style heroism and boasting stories of their triumphed fright. So there you have it, a festive, frenzied night of fun, fear and fond memories. Krampus night became a celebration not merely of the ominous, but of the resilience forged through community and shared tales. It was an annual tradition that embraced the absurd even while cloaked in terror. Give a salute to the children who faced their fears, for every jump at a corner, turned and squeal at a rustling bush was just another chapter of a grand and mischievous Victorian holiday tale. Picture parents donning Krampus costumes while children scamper about, coconuts in hand. They had beauty standards to uphold, but it looks like some took it too far when they rummaged through the attic to create Krampus horror, complete with horns and belches. Can you imagine the sight? A father in a mismatched ensemble of grimy burlap and fake fur, with makeshift hooves crafted from last season's clogs. And Mom? Well, She might be showing some shocking creativity, fashioning a horned headdress that makes her look more like a deranged goat than the fierce parental figure she intended to portray. In the process, every child learned valuable lessons about not just fearing the holidays, but also about the importance of family bonding, through frightful costumes. The neighbourhood would erupt in laughter, shrieks, and maybe the occasional crying child who hadn't quite grasped the just for fun part of it all. Children would dare one another into haunted houses and eerie backyards, where the ghost of Krampus lingered, waiting to snatch up the particularly naughty ones. It's the same savage anticipation that comes when you're waiting for the punchline of a really bad dad joke, equal parts excitement and dread. But don't fret, this was all just part of their warped yet functional holiday observance. Deep down, it was about communities coming together to literally laugh in the face of fear. As Krampus night approached, costumes were meticulously made, not just for the adults, but also for those unsuspecting little devils running around. Imagine the children perched atop their parents' shoulders, wearing mini versions of Krampus masks so grotesque, they'd make even the jolliest elf consider a regime change. Each time they burst through the door for trick-or-treating, it was like watching a tiny horror show. Who needed Disney magic when your neighbour was proudly sporting a demon tail made from hot glue and leftover fabric scraps? You might wonder about the practicality of these bizarre costumes. Can you imagine the logistics? Trying to squeeze into something that resembles a woolly mammoth while trying to wrangle your kids from snatching too many sweets? It was sheer chaos. "Watch your head," someone would cry, and inevitably someone would trip while trying to navigate the hodgepodge of Krampus-themed decorations littering the streets. Outside, the cold air filled with laughter, children clinging to their parents, mistaking terror for glee as they marched onward to confront their community's nightmarish mascot. It wasn't all just fun and games, though. No siree. In classic Victorian fashion, every part of this Krampus night included moral lessons embedded into the fabric of the absurdity. Children learned about virtues, like how one must never steal cookies, or heaven forbid try to sneak an extra ride on Uncle Gerald's back without asking, because you might find yourself stuck back in the attic with the Krampus costume. Those costume disasters served a dual purpose, instilling fear and reminding parents that embracing the grotesque also allowed them to bond with their families through shared humour and a spectacularly bad take on fashion. Perhaps the most intriguing aspect of this whole costume affair was how it obscured the boundary of individual identity. Adult costumes merged with childlike fright, and that blurred line became the delightful chaos that burst forth on Krampus night. Krampus wasn't just a horror story. He was a ritualized celebration of familial love wrapped in the guise of terror. In everyone frantically shouting, "Krampus is coming!" there was an unspoken understanding that fear offered a path to resilience. In hindsight, these Krampus-themed costumes represented a creative subversion of those stringent Victorian elegant standards. They were ties made into fake chains, garish disguises hiding daunting parenting rules designed to keep children in check. So yes, as you fell asleep in your bland, characterless sleepwear, think about the chaos of Victorian fashion and fear. Who knew that the fabric of history could be woven together with half-remembered folklore, albeit with a devilishly delightful twist? There is a lesson buried beneath all this merriment. Sometimes, when you embrace the ridiculous, you find community. And while Krampus may have started as a nightmarish spectre, aiming to scare the misbehaving children into submission, he ultimately became an icon, both a belief that made lasting memories and a source of joy wrapped up in uncanny antics and unorthodox camaraderie. Now let's slip into the adult side of things, where pubs filled with men equally terrified of Krampus and the hangover awaiting them. Was the thought of being caught naughty with Krampus looming outside enough to push those pints down? You bet. Imagine a cosy little establishment with flickering gaslights, the air thick with the smell of roasted meats, and laughter mingling with the clinking of tankards. The only problem? Instead of merriment paving the way for good cheer, there's a restless anxiety lingering, driven by tales of that horned demon prowling outside, ready to haul off the miscreants from within. As patrons huddled in their booths, they furiously negotiated pints as if they were haggling in a market. Beer? A solid choice. Wine? A bit too fancy for this lot. But let's not forget the infamous nasal surrender to the slap of a strong spirit. Ah yes, whiskey was the perfect antidote to Krampus-induced anxiety. One drink led to another, as common fears turned into boisterous stories of bad behaviour that would surely get them on Krampus's radar. "Remember the time Frank spilled ale on his sister during Mass?" someone roared, causing even the stern-faced barkeep to crack a smile. Such tales were often shared with a hushed reverence. Each retelling cranked the pressure up a notch as they collectively encouraged each other through the fog of impending doom. As the night wore on, with every round of drinks, those giddy whispers began to sound like hopeful prayers to keep Krampus at bay. The more they laughed, the more they believed they could shoo him away, at least until last call. Of course, it wasn't all innocent fun. A few might have eyed the clock and thought about how the earlier indulgences had led to some questionable decisions as they stumbled down the cobbled streets. Maybe they cavorted a bit at the spiced sausage stand, exchanging furtive glances at the pretty maidens, maybe too flirtatiously for one's own good. What if Krampus is watching, they'd tease, spilling their mischief into laughter laced with the bitter sting of regret? Were they brave, or just foolish? Perhaps a bit of both. Strong spirits have a way of injecting false courage. But then came the real question. Was getting nabbed by Krampus more terrifying than a lecture from the local constable? With that thought, a quiet dread loomed over the revellers. An ill-timed belch manifesting your regrets served like a wake-up call, made only worse by fable tales of naughty folks finding themselves with Krampus's claws grasping at their throats, or worse, snatched up in his bulging sack. Those memories ignited visions of parents warning children while pulling them close, saying, "You'd better behave, or Krampus will take you away." Meanwhile, back at the pub, men traded exaggerated horror stories under the guise of camaraderie. "Did you hear about the lad who giggled at the wrong moment?" one blustered, filling the room with visual imagery of Krampus's furious wrath. "He got taken, I tell you." More drinks flowed as they accidentally praised the very threats they feared. Gifts for the good, punishment for the naughty, they'd echo, eventually collapsing into laughter that harmonized so remarkably with the panicked clamour of their hearts. As midnight approached, the tavern became a spiritual battleground, with patrons trading tales of how best to appease the beast. Surely some meat pie, consumed away from the normality of sober women's company, could do the trick. Or maybe opting for well-respected folk songs in exchange for a respite from Krampus's terrifying reach. It was all cleverly absurd, a game of chicken with one very stubborn horned villain positioned just outside their drunken grasp. As the spell wore off and drinks turned cold, the dread of Krampus resurfaced again. Who was really keeping tabs? Did their bravado fool the devilish presence lurking around the corner? But at least in the company of fellow imbibers, the fear became more a matter for story than fate. Drunken negotiations promised safety, and for tonight they would laugh, cheer, and be unwittingly naughty under the watchful boyhood gaze of Krampus himself. Or perhaps a distant reminder that the morning sun would shine just as brightly, gilding mediocre life decisions under a light they hadn't reigned in yet. So, by morning, greeted by crusted eyes and disappointingly low tankards, they found that perhaps the greatest fright was more personal than imagined. Krampus just an afternoon tale building camaraderie, not a thief of dreams. Maybe the real challenge was returning to the grind of everyday life, managing to emerge from the revelry without too many tales sewn alongside a bundle of dread. Forget the dull nursery rhymes. It was Victorian literature that turned the Krampus lore into a raging staple for bedtime tales. Think you could sneak in Mark Twain prior to bedtime? Not in this house. The Victorians didn't just settle for tales of sugar-plum fairies and gentle angels delivering gifts. They needed narratives that tugged at the strings of fear and morality like a puppet master, with a penchant for dark humour. In their world, stories served dual purposes, to entertain and to terrify. So instead of hushed voices reading soft stories, they'd gather round the fire as pages flipped and voices rose, echoing warnings about what happens to naughty children at the hands of the fearsome Krampus. Imagine the sheer joy of reading to children on a cold winter's night when the festive decor sends tingling shivers down the spine. Once upon a time, one would begin, only for the heart-thumping twist to follow, there lived a child named Carl. He was precious and delightful, except for that one time he didn't wash his hands before dinner. Cue an exaggerated gasp from the kids. The anticipation hung thick in the air like the scent of burnt chestnuts as parents spun elaborate tales about how canny Krampus would swoop down into their homes like an overzealous chimney sweep after a holiday bender, dragging unruly kids off to his lair in the snowy mountains. Trust me, those children were fully awake by the time bedtime drew near. Even authors like Charles Dickens couldn't resist the tantalising draw of Krampus as a moral compass. Imagine Scrooge tossing and turning, dangerously close to slipping into the grisly nightmare of being on Krampus's list instead of Santa's. With his signature blend of humour and horror, Dickens would have delighted in watching grouchy children bolt upright, instantly regretting their choices as the ghost of Christmas yet to come took on a horned, hoofed demeanour. Then came the illustrator par excellence Thomas Nast, whose 15 from 50s depictions brought Krampus to life with humour and horror, captivating Victorian families and leading to a Krampus-led holiday vibe, much like today's overzealous holiday marketing campaigns. His artwork transformed the demonic figure into a character who pondered more than just scaring kids. He was judging them. How do I teach them a lesson without ruining Christmas entirely? A Krampus figure might ponder, eyes glittering as it stalks the snow-laden rooftops. Now let's turn our attention to the mind-boggling paradox of how these tales were tucked neatly into the pages of children's literature, with an unspoken understanding that they might leave a deep psychological mark. Imagine parents tucking their children in, looking deep into their innocent eyes and saying, "Remember, if you don't brush your teeth, Krampus will come for you in the night." It was a struggle of parental willpower, how to enjoy the holiday spirit while ensuring those gleefully jolly. Kids understood that Santa's affection hinged on fear of the demon in the snow. How do you sleep with that kind of pressure hanging overhead, you wonder? No wonder classic authors dressed Krampus in fur and fabulously unruly horns. It also became a fashion statement in the world of literary terror. The more absurd they made him, the greater effect he had. It was as if Krampus always had a fluffy snowman suit that could make his frightening demeanour feel just a bit more cuddly. Irony dripped from the pages, and it didn't take long for tales of the Krampus to inspire song, poetry, and even annual festivals. As literature painted Krampus into firmer outlines and quirkier tales, children learned to distill their fears down into something they could manage. Just think, these tales brought their anxieties about being good or bad into the realm of imagination, sharpening their own morality while baking cookies, although they may have snuck in a few unwholesome spoonfuls of dough in defiance. Krampus stories soon became tales passed down like family heirlooms, each retelling more exaggerated than the last. Did you hear about the boy who lost his breath from Krampus's icy grasp? One child would whisper to another, each soul hoping to escape the icy depths of his curse. In the world of Victorian literature, the Krampus mythos flourished, enabling parents to wield the power of narrative like the ultimate weapon of persuasion. The scarier the tales, the more convincing the story. With Krampus lurking somewhere beyond the edges of lacy sheets, bedtime truly became the high-stakes event of the night. There you have it, literature carved out of production, fear and laughter, resting comfortably because the Krampus was very much alive in every heart and mind, waiting for the next disobedient display of childhood chaos. The spirit of Krampus morphed into mischievous tales and pranks, creating a community of brave children who not only believed in Krampus, but also made sure that believing was the key. In a world where Christmas felt more like a high-stakes board game and less like a cheerful, festive event, kids tapped into their inner trickster. Those long, dark winter nights fostered a kind of conspiratorial bonding. While the adults sipped mulled wine and spun yarns about the terrible Krampus, kids were busy plotting to make Krampus the centre of their holiday experience. Picture this. The night before Christmas, and your younger sibling is snug in bed, blissfully unaware that you've concocted a Krampus prank worthy of a holiday horror film. An elaborate hoax featuring a skeleton in the closet, or perhaps the family cat dressed up like the horned fiend. This was no light-hearted slapstick. It was a seasonally appropriate rite of passage, one that taught children the value of creativity, fear management, and most importantly, sibling sabotage. Now, let's not pretend there weren't major benefits to these prank-filled traditions. Scaring the living daylights out of each other helped scramble the minds of the mischievous minds tasked with staying on the nice list. You know that feeling when you're curled up with your parents, half choking on your holiday cookies, and then Aunt Gertrude tells the story of how Krampus once swapped a naughty child for a sack of potatoes. It acts like an unintentional therapy session, pulling kids right back in line quick. It wasn't just about obedience, it was part of the ritual of growing up. And let's be real, what's more terrifying than the knowledge that Krampus might be checking in on you through your bedroom window? Or the notion that while you're bickering over a toy, Krampus is possibly lurking with a sinister grin, primed to whisk one of you away. Such ideas were gourmet fodder for the imaginations of youngsters. The enduring question as you lay awake, frozen in terror needing to pee, was, should you check for Krampus or risk it and hold out? There's nothing like an existential crisis to build character. Now, as the prank game escalated, so did the effort. Children exchanged spooky tales filled with discussion of ominous figures lurking in shadowy corners. Soon, nightly storytelling became a competition of who could tell the most frightening tale about Krampus, with winners being favoured by their parents come present time. The ability to spin a yarn became an esteemed skill, as the stakes were nothing less than Krampus's fate on whether to slide down the chimney or walk straight through the front door, skeletons rattling, chains clanking behind him. Fast forward to the next morning, and as children eagerly ripped open brightly wrapped presents, the atmosphere tinged with the sweetness of joy was countercultural to what they had just conjured. The moment of truth arrived with each parent leaning close and asking the big question, were you good this year? The silent exchange between siblings said it all. Did you sustain your whopper of a lie about how you were indeed a good child, who totally never thought of pranking dear Krampus? How could they ruin it? Perhaps it was best to keep quiet about the whole Krampus caper, at least until the grown-ups were distracted. But don't be fooled. Every story told during that festive season was a chance to rehash the tales of Krampus again and again. These weren't historical anecdotes they were sharing. They were building legends, gifting each other the art of storytelling that would echo across generations. sibling teams would unite over the most outrageous pranks, ensuring that the legend of Krampus would ripple through time, cloaked in laughter and peppered with shouts of horror. In essence, this playful spirit of mischief crafted a lineage of stories infused with cautionary tales, leaving behind children who would share those lessons with their own kids, ensuring Krampus remained alive and well, lurking in the shadows of Christmas spirit forevermore. So, whether trampling around in the snow or hiding behind a stack of gift-wrapped boxes, every wicked childhood trick intertwined with bloody red tales of Krampus ensured that the season was never dull and never devoid of wonder. Even a wonder that would send them running for the nearest pillow with subtle reminders of what Santa might have said at last year's holiday dinner. Would he feel the same about their pranks? Just as Krampus shimmied away with something sinister, perhaps peace of mind did too, teaching generations to come that laughter and terror walk hand in hand down cobblestone streets during the holidays. Jump into a world where holiday cards spread cheer or fear, each trying to outdo the other with, you guessed it, Krampus artwork. Imagine opening your mailbox to find a card from Aunt Edna with Krampus grinning, like he just won the lottery. Sure, you'd expect a cosy fireplace scene or a starch-white Santa belly laugh, but no. This card features Krampus clawing his way through a snowdrift, gripping a sack of unfortunate children who mistakenly thought it was cool to sneak an extra cookie before dinner. It's like Aunt Edna was trying to send you a hearty holiday greeting and an existential crisis all at once. Talk about double duty. Now let's unpack this horrifyingly festive trend. In the Victorian era, sending holiday cards wasn't just about maintaining loose connections with distant relatives or letting folks know you remembered their names. Nope. It was about winning at Christmas. Who could send the most chilling or enchanting postcard? Now, Krampus became the ideal darling of December, a grinning potato sack of a monster bringing his own brand of holiday cheer infused with horror. Children could receive greetings showing Krampus whisking away the bad little girls and boys, while the good ones were rewarded with neatly designed Santas smiling beneath glitzy holiday trees. What a way to spark fear-driven holiday spirit. Victorian artists seized the opportunity to flaunt both the grotesque and the magnificent, leading to some truly creative Krampus designs. Forget the cute candy canes. These postcards featured intricate illustrations of clawed hands poised over coal-laden stockings, while Krampus seemed like he was up for a good laugh as innocent kiddos peeped from behind trees in wide-eyed terror. Not exactly the sight that a few nights of caroling would inspire, but these terrifying depictions captured the imagination and nervous laughter of many a family. Now you might wonder, did anyone actually believe receiving these cards would invoke a Krampusian fate? Absolutely. Kids were at once thrilled and shivering as they plotted imaginary showdowns with Krampus under the mistletoe. Those cards became like festive warnings, delivering a vital message that being on Santa's nice list took more than just sweet smiles. It also required a full-blown game plan to evade Krampus and his ominous snatch-and-grab expertise. Picture little Timmy sweating bullets while writing his letter to Santa, with half of his sentences about how he'd never, ever even thought about skipping the veggies again, just in case Krampus was monitoring those thoughts. Moreover, let's consider Aunt Edna's creative process. Did she sip sherry while doodling ferocious Krampuses in red ink? Maybe she penned colourful taglines like, "Joyful greetings from your festive friend who won't eat you this year, if you're good." Humorously chilling, those Krampus cards became conversation starters. Family gatherings would morph into lively debates over whose Krampus card was the most grotesque, and the winner undoubtedly earned the prestigious title of most likely to open a Christmas card from hell. Oh, but it didn't stop there. Enthusiasts weren't satisfied with just sending these ghastly cards. They began to collect them, exchanging the most wickedly creative options in an annual horror fest. An entire underground card-swapping community bloomed, stretching beyond family into the folds of society, where everyone became an active participant in spreading Krampus cheer. You better believe that gatherings would include excited discussions over whose card truly encapsulated the spirit of fear, smiley demons, and the potential dread awaiting misbehaving children. Never a dull moment. Indeed, Krampus-adorned cards were a nationwide phenomenon that trickled down through the ages, ushering in shifts from creepy to kitschy. Fast forward to today, and witness the revival of holiday monsters like Krampus. Holiday cards remake themselves with whimsical fonts and vibrant colours, inviting families to explore cards that say, "Happy Holidays," paired with illustrations of Krampus dancing with kids sporting devilish grins. In this marriage of horror and tourism, the legacy of Krampus became less terrifying and more marketable, capturing attention in merch galore. Those original haunting cards metamorphosed into cheeky reminders that maybe this blending of dark and light wasn't just entertaining but brought communities together, lacing the absurdity of fear with holiday joy. Picture this: people sharing Krampus cards while drinking cocoa, a collective chuckle at how history's most misunderstood monster fell squarely into the blend of fear and festivity. As the Krampusification of Christmas cards continues to evolve, one thing remains certain. This love-hate relationship with a devilish delight has become a vibrant tapestry of absurdity, rivaling even the quirkiest family gatherings. So next time you receive a card that makes you question your childhood behaviour, gently chuckle and thank Aunt Edna for the whimsical horror that fuels your holiday tales. Even now, the ghost of Krampus lingers. You might think this creature is just a relic of yore, but pop culture has resurrected it, in the form of films, merchandise, and even Instagram hashtags. Yes, you heard that right. A menacing beast is thriving on social media like a cat video gone rogue. You might see posts like Krampus kitsch and naughty list on your feed, eliciting the same nervous chuckles that must have radiated around Victorian families as they huddled by the hearth, whispering tales of this sinister figure. Cakes, toys, ornaments, oh my! There's an entire industry dedicated to this beast that once terrified children into better behaviour. Imagine scrolling through Instagram, only to come face to face with a plush Krampus doll, complete with adorable little horns and a cheeky grin. It's endearing in a way that's utterly perplexing. Much like finding a fancy wine opener within a gift basket from your distant uncle, it raises the question, why do we cling to frightening fictional figures? Perhaps in our overly sanitized modern lives we long for a little spice, a darkness that reminds us of the shadows we've long banished from our Christmases. In anticipation of the holiday season, Krampus re-emerges as a counterweight to the jolly old Saint Nick. We see him portrayed as Santa's naughty little accomplice, often depicted in holiday fairs and parades where children scream either in terror or delight, sometimes both. This cultural revival isn't simply nostalgia, it's a form of catharsis. After grappling with our adult anxieties, frustration over the state of the world, and the occasional existential crisis born from 20th century living, we get a kick out of giving a devilish nod to Krampus. Fear, after all, is at once unsettling and exhilarating, much like that questionable piece of fruitcake that you might still be trying to remember who gifted you. Movies have also contributed significantly to Krampus's modern reputation. The 2015 film Krampus merged family dynamics and horror, telling the tale of a family whose Christmas descended into chaos as this creature comes to claim the naughty. The chilling irony of everyone's holiday love culminating into pure madness resonates with our collective psyche. For many of us, the holidays are both a source of joy and tension. Just picture family gatherings where everything feels like a ticking time bomb, waiting for the inevitable argument over politics or why Cousin Margaret insists on wearing that hideous Christmas sweater. Krampus seems to laugh in the face of our holiday stress, reminding us that chaos is just a goal away. But where did this fascination with fear come from? Perhaps we, the descendants of that Victorian past, have inherited the understanding that a healthy dose of fear can act as an effective corrective to misbehaviour. Parents today might not resort to the extremes of yore, opting instead for the beloved Krampus in adorable forms to teach their children about Santa's serious counterpart. You can't help but wonder, though, the next time you're in the gift aisle, will you shrug and consider a cute Krampus-themed plushie for your friend's lactose-intolerant child? Hope this little fellow corrects his behaviour with love and fear, you might say. This modern Krampus, adorning mugs, Christmas ornaments and sweaters, has morphed into a more nuanced symbol. He is no longer just the embodiment of fear, but a playful mascot for those who enjoy the macabre. Celebrating Krampus has even turned into a lively ritual across Europe, with Krampuslauf, parades where costumed figures roam the streets, delighting and terrifying onlookers. Imagine elaborately costumed folks clamouring in the streets, hooting and hollering, with furs and horns, scaring children until they cry, even while older spectators laugh uproariously. So yes, while we've traded the oppressive fear of the Victorian Krampus for something more whimsical, that thread of dread still binds us to our past. From plush toys and horror films to Instagram hashtags, our fascination with Krampus captures the absurd nature of our own lives. In this unsure world we return to Krampus, a delightful mixture of fright and festivity. After all, who doesn't love a little tension amidst holiday cheer? Maybe there's a lesson here. Embrace fear and laughter, because like the legend of Krampus, the unexpected paths in life can lead to the most wild and joyous memories. So, as you hang your stockings this year, don't forget to leave room for this cheeky devil as he reminds us that a little fear never hurts, at least until you meet him face to face. Ah, Victorian England, a time when Krampus needed a good PR agent. In the backdrop of famine, the notion of a horned demon began to seem more like a practical joke on families hoping for fairy tale endings rather than grim realities. While parents nestled beneath threadbare blankets, whispering bedtime tales that terrified their children into behaving like the angels they clearly were not, the sight of Krampus drew closer to reality for many. Imagine, if you will, huddling around a flickering candlelight, a meagre feast of potatoes and gruel laid out like the king's table, all while your older brother steadily stirred the soup that might be swallowed by the proverbial horned beast any minute now. As you sat there, a rumbling belly and a heart full of dread, what better way to ensure you finished your meagre crust of stale bread than the fear of being scooped up by that fiendish figure? Starvation changed the game in England, repurposing Christmas into a mix of jittery anticipation and gnawing anxiety. Children in need of a good night's sleep weren't just dealing with typical fears. No, they were grappling with a serious existential crisis, the creeping thought that Krampus could sacrifice their last semblance of maturity with a quick snatch and grab, whisking them far away into the ether. And now let's consider the elegant art of Victorian parenting. A mother would nudge her little boy to behave with a shining eye and a bit of psychological warfare. "Why don't you show Mr. Krampus how good you can be?" she would say, a smile stretching across her face as if she hadn't heard young Alfred's earlier mischief. Or perhaps you'd prefer an evening ride in his infamous sack. This was not mere motivation. It was the Victorian equivalent of downsizing behavioural expectations with planned panic. With each carrot dangled, the shadows cast by their ramshackle homes felt a little darker, as the children desperately glanced toward the corners, half expecting to find the creature lurking as they practiced their best good faces in the hope of avoiding his grasp. Oh, and about those grumbling kids, who would also entertain another riveting notion, a well-rounded worry over the state of their neighbour's dinner table. If their own homes were filled with the blandness of overcooked root vegetables, wasn't it just possible that the neighbour on the right had invited Krampus himself for a night of culinary delights? Perhaps the Krampus of culinary youth wouldn't be so cruel after all. Who had put this aspect of Krampus folklore on their wish list? A social commentary on the inequality gnawing at the family unit, wrapped in a questionable backstory of sleigh bells and looming dread. It was, if nothing else, a fascinating study of Victorian ambition and societal frugality. And speaking of neighbours, let's venture into the competitive realm of Krampus-related storytelling. You see, to maintain the atmosphere of fear while keeping up with neighbourhood rivalries, children engaged in contests to concoct the most gripping tales, sibling gatherings offered a theatre of sorts, where the oldest brother would share the shocking rumour that Krampus had a penchant for snatching away siblings that failed to fold their laundry. Just imagine little Emily edging closer to her glass of house wine, all while trying to determine if she'd thrown in her favourite dress with her brother's goat-smelling socks. But don't think this frightening folklore solely graced the heads of children. No. Families as a whole soaked it all in. They giggled nervously at dinner parties, reciting tales of the shrieking figure they met in their recent travels, only to veer into a haunting rendition of Krampus's delicate balance between nourishment and mischief. Dinner-time conversations not only passed the time but meticulously constructed a hierarchy of who might end up the most cornered by an imaginary Krampus on Christmas Eve. Therein wrapped the secret cutthroat social dynamic of Victorian households, akin to a clever chess game, where the stakes were any ill-tempered child venturing outside the home. So welcome to this historical swirl, where fear of starvation danced hand in hand with the growing myths concerning Krampus, weaving in and out of dimly lit rooms filled with parental vigilance and cautious giggles. Here lies a narrative stitched together by equal parts stupefaction and visceral anticipation of what horrors awaited those who tickled Krampus's fancy. It turns out that Krampus had become more than a bedtime tale in ominous December nights. He transformed into a symbolic representation of power dynamics, navigating through the challenges of the day. In the world of Victorian myths, the Krampus scare didn't just haunt sleepy children. It echoed through the rickety floors of homes battling famine, raising the stakes above a fraying family unit grappling for survival. As Saturnalia faced its own trials, so too did the notion of an anthropomorphic warning become an unexpected ally, a point of connection in a society steeped in fear and uncertainty, where Christmas was anything but a sure thing. The tales of Krampus weren't just whispered around the fire. They morphed into holiday melodramas filled with bitterness, mirth, and lessons that somehow made children believe that Krampus was more than just a Christmas appropriator. Can you imagine little ones curling up in their ragged beds, wide-eyed and gripping their blankets in sheer terror as their parents unfolded the terrifying saga of Krampus, the horned fiend who trolled the streets looking to snatch unruly children? This wasn't just any bedtime story, it was a psychological thriller wrapped in festive frights. Instead of the usual once upon a time, it kicked off with the crackle of the fire and the looming shadows that danced like demons on the walls. As families settled in, the narrative turned moments of naughtiness into epic tragedies, often filled with laughable moral lessons that hinted at the mischief that dared to disrupt the holiday spirit. What would happen, they intoned, if a child was caught peeking at presents or, heaven forbid, refusing to bathe before the holiday feast? The story would weave a fabric of dread laced with humour. Imagine little Timmy believing he'd wake up in Krampus's sack come Christmas morning, destined to be carted off as a really unsporting souvenir. Oh, maybe he just needs a good wash, the story's narrator would suggest, creating a vivid picture of the creature galloping away with a soapy, grumpy child. The melodrama didn't just entertain, it became a preferred tactic for Victorian parents who mastered the combination of story and lesson. After all, what better way to ensure that children kept their rooms clean than to cast a shadow of Krampus over the mess? You wouldn't want him to come and check, would you? Parents would warn, their eyes gleaming, fully aware of the power they wielded, tyranny wrapped in affection, wrapped in holiday cheer. A pair of innocent seconds could transform into terror-inducing moments with just a few well-placed words. It's a remarkable feat when you think about it, using sheer anxiety to get kids to clean up their toys. But let's talk about the dramatic theatricality, the storytelling that likely turned into a sensational family event. Imagine family gatherings where the whole clan, think great aunts and overly dramatic cousins, sat around the hearth, reciting Krampus tales. They'd warble their voices, slapping their knees and throwing their arms in the air with each new fright, adding layers to the legend like a gourmet layered cake. Even distant relatives zoomed in on their acting skills, turning Krampus into a complex character, tragic, misunderstood, or just plain hungry for disobedient children, resulting in spirited debates on his motivations that ran late into the night. As lore spread and retold, kids took the tales more seriously, embedding them into their lives like an ongoing episode of a holiday series. Not to mention, Krampus's fear factor spilled into their everyday mischief. If little Mary threw a tantrum in the local store, she'd glance back, half expecting the looming shadow of Krampus to circle the shelves waiting for her to misbehave. Nice kids get candy, naughty ones get Krampus, became the undeniable truth they clung to. It elevated the idea of good versus evil into a relatable contest that spurred not just fear, but also a sense of community-induced involvement. Children could bond over their shared fear, concocting schemes to avoid Krampus while comparing notes about his antics, evolving from tales of caution to club-like camaraderie. But amid the hushed horror, there lay an undercurrent of humour that lifted spirits. A bad mix of sugar and spice can only lead to a grand performance, right? So why not throw in the occasional tale of Krampus getting caught in a tree or stumbling over a snowbank, muttering curses under his breath? The laughter and shock value kept kids engaged, ensuring that the terror of Krampus didn't overpower their naive holiday joy. As the years went by, Krampus became this beloved cultural touchstone. So much more than a simple scare tactic, but a complex character that threaded through generations. In a roundabout homage to their childhood fears and laughter, adults would inevitably pull out their own Krampus tales to share with future generations, ensuring that the unique blend of dread, humour and moral teaching remained alive. So here we are, thousands of years later, with holiday celebrations transformed into a delightful blend of joy and a bit of the absurd, forged from Krampus-themed tales that wove fear into the fabric of family gatherings. Who needs Netflix when you have the wild creations of a mischievous horned demon to narrate around the fire? And just think, if Krampus survived to live in our hearts, then surely all the children who cowered under their blankets with a gleam of Krampus in their eyes today might just pass it on to their children, making the tradition live on. After all, Christmas wouldn't be nearly as colourful without a touch of fright, wouldn't you agree? For every well-behaved child, there was a slew of ill-spirited siblings sharpening their claws on their own levels of chaos. How they imagined one day they'd make it onto the Krampus roster to earn a spot on their parents' list. The allure of being the star in a Krampus tale was oddly enticing, Imagine dazzling your inattentive peers by showcasing how you were special, by receiving that ultimate warning that knocked the wind out of the holiday season. Parents would parade the naughty list as a badge of honour, letting children vie for their place like a prize fighter, itching to enter the ring. So, what did it take to land on that infamous naughty list? Picture it, a child named Heinrich, bursting with excitement after sneaking cookies before dinner, giggling as he watches his sister Greta tumble down the stairs after he replaced her favourite doll with a potato painted like a Krampus. The delicious horror of being naughty was in the very fabric of this era, as if kids were competing in the Olympics of mischief. Being careless about manners sounds like Krampus fodder. Cheating on homework, surely worthy of an entry. And who could resist arraigning their siblings in the court of family judgment, plotting their downfall like mischievous little Shakespearean villains? But alas, all fun must come with consequences, and just as parents cheerfully stitched together tales of holiday miracles, they carefully crafted the narrative of Krampus as the ultimate enforcer of the order. Stay in line or face the dark far side of toys, they'd warn, their eyes glinting like frost-covered windows. The psychological elevation of Krampus transcended mere folklore. It anchored deeper roots into behavioural conditioning. As one could imagine, children learned the importance of behaving themselves under the ever-watchful eye of Krampus. Heinrich soon realised that every candy wrapper he'd slipped under the bed had the potential to summon the looming dread just beyond the walls, lurking menacingly in the shadows, just waiting for a chance to catch him misbehaving. "You wouldn't want Krampus to knock on the door tonight, would you?" whispered his parents, nervously peering into the darkness as if expecting the grand entrance of this demonic deliveryman any second. The whole vicious cycle became a marvel of creativity, with kids concocting fantastical plans for how to ascend the charts of unruliness, much like aspiring rock stars trying to get their big break. Perhaps they'd hold a Krampus-themed playdate. Sure, the premise sounds absurd today, but the joyous thrill of simply being on the naughty side had a peculiar charm back then. The stories morphed into intricate sagas, and every act of defiance was but an audition for the more entertaining chapters yet to come in Krampus's anthology. Of course, the sinister nature of Krampus didn't come without its dangers, and every child learned quickly that being naughty bore the risk of being taken away. In an age of caution, parents made it clear that a few missteps could result in a direct ticket to the underworld, where the grass wasn't as green, and there were definitely no video games or cake for breakfast. Despite these fears, one can detect an equally competitive undertone. Perfecting the art of just how naughty one could be without ever crossing that final threshold was an exhilarating dance, a balance between cherished freedoms and the unyielding dread of Krampus's clutches. Those competitive spirits ran rampant among the children, transforming the holiday season into an emotional rollercoaster, crafting and uncrafting the chaos surrounding their reputations in the midst of loving families, all while teetering on the edge of disaster. Preferred naughty lists were like family heirlooms, carefully passed down through generations until today. We find echoes of that Victorian magic living on in our own holiday traditions. Yes, kids of today aren't deprived of the delightful fear that keeps them on the straight and narrow. So, the next time the little ones sink a little too deep into the realm of chaos, just imagine yourself in that Victorian age, plotting against fellow siblings with glee, while Krampus sleeps soundly in the corner, waiting to ensure the spectacle of reckless childhood antics doesn't morph into real-world chaos. Because after all, what would old Krampus want more than his roster filled with young story-makers, crafting their futures dictated by a well-timed fear-infused holiday tale? Now that's what I call holiday spirit. Beneath the tales of Christmas dread lay layers of societal commentary. a more complex understanding of punishment, morality, and the absurdity of using fear as a deterrent for misbehaviour. In a world where values were steeped in strict social constructs, and the fear of losing status or even life itself was a constant companion, the legends of Krampus served a stark purpose. They offered not just thrills and chills, but a reflection of the pressing need to maintain order, often through intimidation. Imagine living in an age where the line between good and evil was drawn with a quill pen dipped in the ink of superstition and in grim realities. Children didn't just fear punishment. They were taught to fear Krampus, a devilish creature as real to them as the soot on their faces after a day of play. Picture a child nestled under the covers, anxiety and excitement battling for supremacy, as they calculated whether the small mischief they committed this week would tip them into Krampus's clutches. Instead of being told, "If you're naughty, you'll ruin Christmas," parents sang, "You'll be whisked away by Krampus, you little scamp." Now that's a bedtime story with teeth. The absurdity of it all raises the question, was a little fear really such an effective parenting tool? Let's flash forward to today's gentle parenting techniques. Timeout, stickers, gold stars. Krampus would throw a mitten over that whole approach. He quite literally came with claws and a bag big enough to fit a naughty child or two. What might have started as a humorous way for parents to discipline unruly children morphed into a cultural staple, embedding itself deeply into the psyche of society. For the Victorians, this concept of using terror as a social equalizer made perfect sense. The Krampus stories reinforced the authority of parental figures, while simultaneously poking fun at their own fears of failing to deliver respectable children unto society. And humour was vital, as life was often a tumultuous series of issues ranging from poverty to inadequate sanitation, a sort of sloppy Christmas pudding of challenges you couldn't ignore. The Krampus narrative enriched the cultural exchange, functioning as both a cautionary tale and an absurd caricature of the repercussions of bad behaviour. But in a twist of delightful irony, Krampus became a symbol of celebration by creating a space where people could joke about the very fears that pervaded their lives. The beast was drawn in bright colours on holiday cards, and the tales featuring his exploits turned into parlour games. Families could gather, eat gingerbread, and chuckle nervously over hot cocoa while sceptically glancing at their children. Well, you three might as well create your own Krampus story if you keep bumping into the Christmas tree. The Krampus phenomenon morphed from an encouragement of sombre virtues into a festive fright fest that allowed families to confront their fears and communal expectations with humour and absurdity. And let's not forget how these tales provided excellent material for gossip. Gather round at the pub or over a plate of roasted chestnuts and watch as adults relish in the storytelling drama of, "Did you hear what Krampus did last week? Little Timmy was up to no good, and you better believe that grinning monster gave him the fright of his life." Adding a tinge of schadenfreude to the mix, the lore became an excellent opportunity for parents to measure their own virtue against those of their neighbours or friends. Of course, the moral implications were slippery, much like a well-oiled Krampus himself. Tales of Krampus allowed Victorians to confront the darker aspects of nature, urging children to have an acute awareness of the thin line that separated them from misbehaviour and possible demon kidnapping. It served as an unsettling reminder that being nice was a social contract with decidedly dire consequences for those who might flout it. But it also opened the door for lighter interpretations, allowing communities to engage with their myths while maintaining a sense of unity through shared humour. So, in the end, what do we glean from the Krampus tales? They aren't just stories of a ferocious creature lurking in shadowy corners, nor merely legends desiring to induce fear. No, they encapsulate the very essence of cultural norms and methods of control. The dance between fear and laughter fosters resilience, curiosity, and ultimately a community that acknowledges the absurdity of the human condition. It might be a bit of fright with each festive bite, but the Krampus stories also served as tools of bonding that echoed through the generations. It was a paradox, a ripe fruit hanging from the tree of folklore, reminding us all that sometimes humour is the best antidote for fear while fiddling with a notorious devil behind the scenes. So the next time you're tucking the kiddos in at night, consider fetching a Krampus tale or two. After all, you might just end up with giggles instead of tears. The Krampus phenomenon persists as a reminder of those wild Victorian days, imparting wisdom to modern families that love and fear can coexist, even if that means thinking twice before misbehaving this holiday season. Imagine a time when the mere mention of Krampus could instantly send a chill down the spine of any child spiralling into disobedience. Behave, or you'll wake the Krampus became the Victorian equivalent of, if you keep staring at that phone, I'll throw it out the window. This legend encapsulated the delicate balance between festivity and foreboding, a duality that still resonates today. While you might expect scares to be reserved for horror movies or Halloween, Krampus strolled right into Christmas, capering with a sack full of darkness and merriment alike. One might even argue he had a flair for motivational speaking, albeit with a much sharper edge than your typical life coach. Parents would gather their children around dimly lit hearths, gazing into the flickering flames while old tales of the Krampus echoed off the walls. "Listen closely, dear ones," they'd say, "for the Krampus is listening too." You can imagine the little ones' eyes widening in terror as they grasped just how much power their parents wielded with just a few pointed words. This intertwining of fear and care manifested uniquely within families, like throwing your favourite toy into a bonfire while insisting it was for your own good. Victorian parenting embraced the philosophy that a little intimidation could go a long way towards shaping good behaviour, and boy, did it work. Instead of the fretful pleas of a modern-day kid asking for just one more cookie before bed, Victorian children would have been too terrified to even ask for a second helping of pottage. Let's not forget how Krampus became a social commentary, entrenched in the era's fears and insecurities. The Victorian age was rife with anxieties about poverty, the Industrial Revolution, and societal upheaval. This is where Krampus came in like the unsolicited advice from a distant relative, albeit with horns and a penchant for biting. He personified the anxieties swirling about in the human experience, a walking advertisement for the consequences of poor behaviour amidst an environment rife with constraints and expectations. "Do not misbehave, or you risk upsetting the balance of holiday cheer," was just one of the messages he carried like a trusty suitcase stuffed with freshly harvested dread. But beyond the grim tales and sharpened claws of the Krampus lore lies something even deeper: resilience. The stories that were stitched into the fabric of the holiday season resiliency were not just meant to frighten kids into compliance. They also prepared them for life's myriad challenges. These stories came with a clear moral compass, illuminating the importance of kindness over cruelty and responsibility over recklessness. Children learn to navigate social dynamics, weighing the consequences of their actions in ways modern-day lectures simply don't seem to capture. Modern parents can certainly learn from this peculiar approach, as different methods for instilling good behaviour can evolve and adapt through the ages. Perhaps we might even find a sweet middle ground, like placing a festive Santa poster next to a cheeky Krampus image. A visual warning that behind every cheerful elf lurks the potential for consequence. After all, a little light-hearted fear could motivate children to tackle their chores without the requirement of bribery or 3 calls to the spirit of San Francisco. And what about the holiday itself? Fast forward to the present day, and you find the Krampus phenomenon still a beloved part of some European festivities, such as Krampusnacht in Austria. Participants roam the streets donning elaborate Krampus costumes, banging on pots and pans, mixing dread into the stillness of December nights, while reminding families of their past fears, resilience, and the passage of time. Emerging into the modern holiday landscape, this vibrant celebration shows that joy and laughter can thrive even in the face of mild terror, essentially embracing the spirit of both our fears and our joys. So as we navigate the intricacies of modern family life this holiday season, perhaps we should invite a little Krampus magic into our own celebrations. Acknowledging that love and fear exist side by side may just empower your family to appreciate the sweetness of kindness a bit more, while taking heed of the lurking shadows waiting for mischief. Together, we learn, through the lens of history, that the path to resilience might just be a little darker and fuzzier than we expected, lit by twinkling lights and the faint ringing of Krampus bells.